Chapter 30. Dreadnought finished his espresso, blotted his lips and rose, leaving the coffee shop on Bond Street. His destination was a church in Marylebone. His business with Donato Bianchi had neither drawn acknowledgement nor reprimand from his superiors. Instead, there had been complete silence, and for the first time in his career he felt a tingle of fear. The uncommon feeling for self-preservation had kick-started his primal instinct. He'd decided to up his game in the fitness stakes and had begun to work out twice as hard at the gym and shooting range. He'd also been busy performing his own unauthorized recon work on the Monica girl. She'd gained access to Chrisid Bank. Why she'd been interested in that aged financial institution he didn't know, but he'd find out. If his covert actions within the Titan organization were discovered, it would be bye-bye world. The only thing he felt sure of was that she'd lied about having relatives. He'd initially concluded her response fitted her demographic. An only child, attending past school by the grace of her dead parents' financial foresight, with no friends. Why shouldn't she pretend to a perfect stranger that someone cared about her? Still, he'd been certain she'd been telling the truth when she'd stated they couldn't make it to her graduation. Her eyes had lied. Steady, unflinching and open, they kept coming back to haunt him. It didn't add up. The report that he'd been given had been a verbatim account of his meeting with her. So why had he intimated she had family that were unaccounted for? Because, in his gut, he believed it was true. But if that was so, his organization would have picked up on it by now, unless they had a reason not to. The Titan organization chose people with no attachments, or attachments that an operative could prove beyond a shadow of a doubt were expendable. He knew in taking the initiative outside his brief, the mistake wouldn't go unpunished. If he were to salvage anything, he had to act quickly. He'd kept tabs on everyone associated with her. He'd been surprised when Pilgrim's name came up. Dreadnought ran his well-manicured finger down the remnants of a page that had been torn from the registry for births, marriages and deaths at Marylebone Church, and exhaled, aggravated by his mental lethargy. Now there was no doubt in his mind he'd been right. Slamming the leather-bound book shut, its echo filled the chancel. He stepped over the dead body of the priest, having expertly snapped his neck 5 minutes prior. Shortly after, he began shoveling earth over the priest's corpse that he'd thrown into a recently dug grave, muttering to himself, "Why couldn't people just be more cooperative? Was it too much to ask who'd rip the page from the book? Next time, answer the bloody question, moron." The doors of the National Archives, holding census records, were pushed open as Dreadnought stumbled out, his face ashen. Treading heavily down its steps, he stopped midway. He'd aged in the hour and a half it had taken him to ascertain whether Monica had any living relatives. His eyes flicked this way and that in hesitation as he made his way back to his car. His mind wanted to assimilate what he'd learned, but his body was well and truly in the fight or flight mode. He took to his heels and got behind the wheel of his car. Slamming the door behind him, he made sure it was locked. There was no point extending an open invitation to the Titan's legendary killer, Mr. Phelps, Monica Phelps's father. His own death didn't concern him in the least, but he knew with certainty, like any great maestro, Mr. Phelps would create a pièce de résistance of prolonged torture just for him. Dreadnought's body began to betray him as he sweated profusely. As he peeled out of the car park, Mr. Phelps lowered his binoculars, the faintest of smiles playing across his mouth. This just kept getting better. Dreadnought now knew Phelps would be the one to take his life. Phelps felt a tremor ripple through Dreadnought's confidence. Would Dreadnought be foolish enough to go after Monica, to save his own skin? God, he hoped so.